God said, you know what? Even though you didn't listen to me all those years, I'm not only going to bless you now that you've been through the desert and you're willing to listen to me. Yeah. I'm even going to use the mistake you used that you did back in law school. And I'm going to actually use that so that you can get a little jump start on your career.
Welcome to the Darren Earlywine podcast, where we awaken you to become who you were born to be. Here's your host, Darren Earlywine.
Welcome back to another episode of the Darren Earlywine podcast. The crowd is already on their feet. Ladies and gentlemen, sit down, take it easy. It's only episode 36, but it is episode 36. We just keep cranking them out week after week after week, and we're so glad that you're joining us each and every week. The downloads keep going up. The subscription keeps going up. We couldn't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough. We're going to try to for downloading, listening to each episode, sharing it with friends, leaving us some reviews, whatever platform you're using. Means a lot and helps us grow the audience here and make a difference to remind people each and every week that God's for them, not against them. He's near to them, not far away. And then he's for them. And then he's created them on purpose and for a purpose. And I love hearing from any of you guys that are listening. And I want to give a big shout out to Kelby all the way out in South Dakota. I spent some time in South Dakota. Pretty cool state. Although the drive from the east side all the way to the west side of South Dakota, one of the longest drives I've ever been in my life. Kelby, I'm not sure where you're at in South Dakota, but I do love some South Dakota. But Kelby reached out and he said, hey, thank you for the podcast. He said, I've been listening from South Dakota, and I absolutely love them. I went through a very difficult season this past year, and your podcast has really helped me in my faith. Just wanted you to know that I appreciate it and the content and look forward to the wisdom you provide in the future. Kelby, thanks so much, bud. It means a lot that you've listened. I'm glad the podcast was a blessing to you and for whatever you've gone through in this past year. It's just been my joy to be able to remind you each and every week, man, that God is for you, not against you. He is near you, not far away, even all the way out in South Dakota. And he has created you, Kelby, on purpose and for a purpose. And I hope that as you listen and you glean from the guests and from what we share here on the podcast, that it helps you take your next step to becoming who you were born to be. So that was super cool. And then I got to hear back from LaVon Reap. LaVon that was our guest just a couple weeks ago here on the podcast. And LaVon promoted her Dreamer Retreat. I think you guys she talked about that. And she has had many, many, many of you reach out about getting involved in a Dreamer Retreat. So predominantly ladies, it's kind of a thing designed for you ladies out there. And so for all of you ladies that have gotten involved in her Dreamer Retreat or are excited about being a part of it when she comes here to Indiana this summer, so stoked that you guys are following through and connecting with the guests that we have here on the podcast. They mean it when they say they want you to reach out to them. And if there's somebody that you think you could journey with to take your next step to become who you're born to be, that is amazingly cool. So that's going on. And we're going to jump into this week's episode. We're sitting down with a new friend named Chip Woods. And I'll leave it to the intro. You'll hear in the intro, this was a little bit of an interesting episode, and we'll talk about it right off the beginning this week. But one thing that Chip's going to talk to you guys about, and I'm excited when I spoke with Chip months and months and months ago and heard his story, and I thought, you know what, I want to have Chip on the podcast because we have people here on the podcast that have written books and lead, global ministries and are pastors and authors and all kinds of stuff. And I know the reality is the majority of you aren't that. You're trying to discover God's call for your life. You're working in a job somewhere. You have a career, and you're trying to just figure out how you most maximize who God's created you to be. And Chip's story is one that I know you're going to identify with career-wise at this point in his life. And for the past 20 years, he's a financial planner for folks, help them manage their money. But the journey that got him there was really, really interesting because Chip's going to talk about the fact that from a very young age, his dream was to be a lawyer, and he went after it without ever actually consulting God if that was his plan for his life. And so if there's maybe a title for this episode, it could be called this: Consulting God About Your Career in Cancer, because that comes into play in this story as well. And I just ask you the question before we get into Chip's interview is, have you asked God what his will is for your life? Now, I'm guessing if you listen to this podcast, you have already asked, but you may not have. Some of us have this mentality, right, that we're going to do whatever we want to do. We're going to pursue whatever we want to pursue. And then as we're in process, we'll kind of ask God to catch up, right? Like God's out in the caboose, right? We're running the train. We're up in the engine. We're stoking the fires of the engine, right? With all of our dreams, with all of our ambitions, with all of our gifts. And we're saying, hey, God, back there in the caboose somewhere, could you maybe throw a little bit of Jesus pixie dust on the dream here? Because I'm going to do whatever I want to do and hope that you're okay with it. And here's the crazy thing. Oftentimes, God will let that happen. And it's an interesting thing about his grace and his mercy is he will often allow us to do whatever we want. And I want that to kind of concern you, that you have the ability and power to create the life that you want. But the reality is it may not be the life that he's created you to live. And as I look through the biblical stories to try to find some context to get us into this interview, I thought about this, is that every once in a while, you'll see people in their life where God kind of knocks them on their ass or off their ass, I guess, the way he did with Saul, right? You remember the story with Saul before he became Paul, right? He's riding to Damascus, I think it is, right? He's on the donkey, and then Jesus shows up basically in the big thing of light, and he knocks Saul off the donkey rears up and he knocks him on the ground, and then Saul goes blind for 3 days and he gets taken. There's this whole story where there was this major, massive, life-stopping moment where God was like, I need to get your attention. You are not going the right way in your life. Sometimes there is a knock you off your ass type moment, and you may be in that or you've gone through that. And you know what? Thank God for those moments, because sometimes we need that kind of attention grabber. However, I think most often the story that may apply to us is that of the Old Testament and the 40 years of the Israelites wandering in the desert. So every once in a while, God knocks you off the donkey, but more often than not, he lets you wander in the desert for 40 years. That's the tension I want you to bring into this episode. Is there a chance that I'm on year 15 of a potential 40-year journey in the desert, just doing circles with my life because I've yet to consult God on what his plan is, or I've yet to submit my will to his plan? Chip's going to unpack that for us, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Here's the good news. The good news is this. This whole process isn't about belonging in relationship. It is about becoming who you're born to be. So the security, the acceptance, all of that is there, right? It's not about belonging, but it is about becoming. And sadly, it's also about regrets. Because oftentimes, if you haven't consulted, if you've not submitted, and you're just doing circles in the desert, you're probably racking up a pretty good resume of regrets. Let's jump in right now with Chip Woods. What a good guy. So glad to sit down with him. Enjoy this conversation right here on the Darren Early Wine Podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Darren Early Wine Podcast. And you know what? Chip, I don't know how honest I should be with our people, but I feel like honesty is kind of the best policy.
Like that.
So, I want, you know what, Chip? I want people to understand that there's grace for everyone, even for me, because we're becoming better friends the more times we record this podcast.
Agreed.
We had Chip on about a month ago, I think it was, and you did a phenomenal job. It was a great podcast episode, and we went back to edit it all down, and Chip sounded great. It sounded as if possibly my mic was completely turned off, which it was. And so we've had you back, Chip Woods. Welcome back to the podcast. We've checked the audio. Both mics are working.
That is awesome. And if the first time was a trial run, I can't imagine how amazing. They're going to hit this out of the park, no doubt.
Yes, this will be the greatest conversation ever had in the history of humanity, or at least our lives, because we're doing it again. But welcome back to the podcast, Chip.
Thanks.
And I'm excited about sharing your story again, although you shared it with me, but we didn't share it with them last time, because you have we've talked to people on the podcast sometimes that maybe they run a ministry, or maybe they have a book, or they're a pastor or a musician or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, currently, professionally, you're a financial advisor. And
Right.
the mass majority of everybody that's part of the Darren Wine podcast, they have a regular career job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the difficult things to get our minds around sometimes is, how can I have just a regular career but yet fulfill a sense of calling?
Yeah.
And your journey into that is one that's going to be instructive and I think really inspiring for our audience. So thanks for being back.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Darren. I appreciate round 2. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So fill in the blanks a little bit. Give us some of your vitals, kind of who is Chip Woods and your life, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the best place to start is at the beginning, but I'll be brief. But grew up or was born in upstate New York, and then had a short stint in Cincinnati, moved here to the Carmel area back in 1976 when it was a lot of cornfields.
Yeah.
But as far back as I can remember, really, Darren, I've wanted to be an attorney. And so my trajectory in life was to that end.
Was that a family profession? Did you look up to somebody that was an attorney? Did something hit with you when you were a kid?
I have memories of watching legal shows and feeling inspired by that. And then I think my ego was stroked where people were telling me, you'd be a really good attorney. You probably because I was argumentative and had some skills at a young age, but that makes sense. And of course, the status back at that time. I mean, you're probably too young to remember L.A. Law.
I know. I remember L.A. Law. I was going to even date myself and say maybe you've been watching Matlock or something, which was a good one.
Well, you're not. I'm dating myself. I was watching Perry Mason.
Okay.
So that was a little bit before
you
Matlock.
have me beat.
Yeah.
So not a family deal, but just the prestige of it. And it's interesting to me, too, because, I think we don't realize sometimes the power of our words have on kids.
Right.
You know what I mean? But just people suggesting that into your life. And, yeah, obviously the trappings that come with what we would perceive as being a lawyer are like, you know what, that would work for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other thing, too, Darren, is that it's true now. I think you would agree with this, is that one of the first things you're asked when you meet someone is, what do you do?
What do you do?
Right? And I think that's kind of ingrained in us when we're younger too. It's like, do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be, something that's in the world's eyes kind of prestigious? And that's kind of a trajectory that we go on, is that we want to have identity and purpose in what we do as an end, as opposed to a means for God to use us in whatever vocation that is.
That's huge.
Yeah,
That's
I think
huge.
so.
So was faith a major part of your upbringing? Were you hearing your parents say things like, "Hey, God's created you on purpose. He has a calling on your life"? What was that like as a kid?
Well, I know my mom's going to be listening to this, so I have to be careful.
You edit it up there, right?
Give her all the credit, right? Something like that. My mom would be the first to say is that we had kind of a tumultuous upbringing. It wasn't the most stable situation, and God wasn't really central to what we did early in our lives.
Okay.
Christ became a really central part of things as probably around the age of 12 or 13. And that's when I had committed my life to Christ, and where I knew something was different in me. But probably like a lot of your listeners, they may have become believers earlier in life, and then all of a sudden life takes these meandering paths, right? I'm not one of those that got saved and then boom, all of a sudden it was just a straight line up, and my faith just grew and grew and grew. I was a believer, but I went off to DePaul University was where I went and graduated, and then had a short stint in Washington, D.C. and worked for Senator Lugar, for some of you Hoosiers that remember Lugar from years back. And then went to law school. And it was really during my law school years where I recommitted myself. When I was at DePaul, there were a lot of temptations. I was in a fraternity house, still have a lot of good friends from that time, but faith was not central at that time. Yeah. And so I did things a lot the way I kind of wanted to do them, and I kind of put the Lord in the closet.
Yeah. So, and it sounds like from that, DePaul going and then law school, and you're in D.C., like you had that dream early on, like this is what I'm going to do, and you set the course, and went after it.
Yeah, I would say that probably a number of people can relate to this. Is that if you're wired in such a way where you say, okay, I have a goal. I'm gonna fight through. I mean, we're taught that really from perseverance, hard work. You know, if you fall down, you don't stay down. You get up. You just keep persevering. I mean, that's something that's a virtue that's extolled across all faiths. You know, it's an American thing, right? You just keep working towards that goal.
Yeah.
So for me, it was no matter what kind of obstacle came before me, and I did have some along the way about being an attorney, I just said, well, I'm going to just keep working at it. I'm going to keep moving forward. I have that as my goal. And probably a little bit, Darren, it was a little bit of my identity because I in my own mind thought of it as failure if I didn't do this. And so I just kept powering through that. And when I did reach it and I passed the bar and I was practicing law, it was this, maybe you can relate to this. Gosh, I've got what I thought I wanted, and it's not all I thought it was.
I've got the brass ring, but maybe it was made of aluminum or something.
Yeah, right, paper. Yeah, exactly. And so that's when I just really started to say, okay, Lord, I'm willing to listen now.
So Chip, do you feel like as you look back and you said there were some of those obstacles you had to push through, like I'm going to overcome this. You can knock me down, but you're not going to knock me out, whatever. Looking back, do you see those as they were just some things that happened, or do you interpret that as like maybe God was going like, hey, like maybe I've got something else for you? What's your, looking in hindsight, what's your interpretation of that?
Yeah, I mean, I might kind of meander around in this in answering your question, Darren, because I would say that it's been more upon reflection that God has revealed to me that he wasn't central to a lot of what I was doing at the time.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians can relate to this, is that sometimes they'll say, okay, this is what I want, so I'm going to pray. I'm going to ask God to make this work.
Yeah.
And another good one too is that I'm going to start talking to other people and other godly people. And if I hear a bunch of no's, I'll just wait till I hear a yes and say, boom, there's confirmation that that's what God wants me to do.
Yep.
So I really think on reflection that I was overcoming a lot of these hurdles that may have been signs, I think, that for God to say, are you really consulting me along the way? Because I wasn't. I was really kind of doing, I would talk to him, but it was more on my terms, and I was saying, okay, what do you want me to do, Lord? And so I believe that the lesson that I learned from all of this is that we need to be able to consult the Lord before any kind of decision. Certainly major decisions like vocation, decisions like relationships, decisions like partnerships in business or what have you. Excuse me. And so when we don't consult those things, there's going to be a consequence more times than not. That was true in my case. I was miserable for 3 years, practicing law. But what the other side of it that's really kind of exciting is that God doesn't say, well, you know what? Because you didn't listen to me, you're going to be in the desert for the rest of your life, or you're going to be punished for the rest of your life. Yeah. So the way that I look at it in answering your question, Darren, is that I think that God said, you know what? I have a plan for you. I'm giving you direction, but to the extent you don't listen to me, I'm going to let you fall.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
And I'm going to forgive, but I can't remove the consequences of you not listening to me.
Yeah.
So I felt some of those consequences along the way, but I also am grateful that it wasn't. I don't serve a God that says, you know what, because you didn't listen to me,
right? Here's your punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember, Chip. I remember when I was in college. I remember we were trying to figure out, our next step. I had a traveling ministry, the band that was my entire identity and everything I had dreamed of doing my whole life, and it came crashing down. And I'm just months away from graduating college. I remember talking to a pastor, a mentor, and I said, I feel like that following God is like like I'm on that game show, Let's Make a Deal. You've seen that show, right? Where they,
of course,
Monty Hall, right? Door number 1, door number 2, and like, right. I remember coming to this major decision. We didn't know what we were supposed to do next, and I remember feeling like if I choose wrong, like God's will's behind one of these doors, And then behind one of these doors is the big pile of like, elephant manure, right? So it's like, you better choose right or, you're screwed. And the pastor that day let us know it's like no, that's not God's character. Like you could even choose wrong and he's not going to abandon you. Like he's still, a part of this journey. And so that it freed us up to go, okay, we're going to ask God for wisdom. We're going to move in the best way we know how, believing that we've got his wisdom and knowing that like, even if we choose wrong, he's still faithful in that. And you experienced that in the journey God took you in. But what I want to hear is you've accomplished the life goal. You've got the title. I'm a lawyer. I'm doing it.
Right.
And I've put, thousands of dollars and thousands of hours into this pursuit. There had to be voices in your head as you were thinking, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. This isn't what I thought it was. Feeling like it doesn't matter. This is, you've come too far. You're trapped in here for the rest of your life. What were some of those thoughts, emotions, that stirring when you're like, man, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here?
Yeah. So you remember the story of David when he sinned with Bathsheba, and I think about that, and I think it was Nathan that came and rebuked him and challenged him, and it was almost like David, he didn't see it, and when he saw it, then it was like, oh, tremendous sense of certainly some guilt, but he had the gift of repentance at that point. He turned around and he became a man after God's own heart. And I think that's kind of the way that I was when I was practicing law, is that when you are so singularly focused and you say, I believe God wants this for me. I mean, how often have you heard God wants me to be happy? I mean, certainly nothing in Scripture that says that, but that seems to be a very familiar maxim for a lot of people. God wants me to be happy,
right?
So therefore, I'm going to go marry this woman, or I'm going to leave my wife, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And so when you have that singular focus and you don't consult God, it's just so easy to just completely miss what he has planned for you. And then when you get what you want, and it's kind of like that David moment where it's like, boy, is this it? Is this really where? It's kind of a feeling of, gosh, what's the next? I couldn't even imagine 30 years, but what's the next year or two going to be like this? I had met my now wife of 25 years, but I had met Barb, and we had similar goals where she was, her calling was to be a mom. And I had a load of law school debt, and I'd never had a mortgage before, and we were engaged, or shortly thereafter to be engaged. And just this pressure of, wait a minute, now I've reached the mountaintop of my career, and not only am I unfulfilled, I don't know if this is really I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this and really have it be the vocation to be able to provide for my family and really have it be something that's going to be fulfilling and do all the things I thought that career was going to afford. Helping people, feeling like all of my, I'm being a little altruistic, making lots of money and providing for my family and feeling fulfilled in what I did. None of that was happening.
I want to go back to something you said that I think is a huge principle before we get back in the story, Chip, is that the amazing, I guess we just say the amazing grace of God is that I think I can blanket statement this. I'm going to say that, we'll just go 95% of the time.
Okay.
God will give you what you want. He'll let you, like there's so many times that, I've wanted to pray, or I have prayed, like, God, don't let me mess anything up, or don't let me, or I'll, when you have some kind of besetting sin in your life, I'm never going to do that again. God, don't let me ever do that again. And it's like, no, he never takes away our ability to make decisions. He gets involved, but that's a huge principle to realize. It's like, I don't know that you can necessarily completely, I think the word tells us God's call and his, and his gifts, they're irrevocable. Like, I think you got to really, really try to screw up God's plan for your life, because he's always there, but he really will give you what you want. And just how important that is, that if you actually want to follow Jesus and you want God's plan for your life, that how huge consulting him, like you're saying, is like, where are you leading and guiding directing? Because if you just keep going, you can find yourself wherever you, in some ways, want to take yourself.
Yeah, you said the magic words there, where consulting him, because you can get into this where you hear a lot on TV, prosperity gospel, like God wants you to be happy, or he will reward you just if you have faith and if you ask him without consulting him. Because the other part of knocking and the door will be open, asking, and you shall receive, later says, according to his will. And you don't know his will if you don't consult him, right? So if you say, God's going to give me what I want by asking him, but I'm not going to consult him beforehand, or I'm not going to, think about it. I mean, you've got kids, right? Anybody that has children or been around children, parents usually are a little bit wiser than their kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was a Mark Twain quote that said, I couldn't believe at 12 how foolish my father was, and at 25 how much he'd learned. And you could insert any age you want, but kids are a lot smarter today than their parents are until they get old enough to realize, my parents were pretty wise. And so a parent has experience and has knowledge and has the ability to know things that kids can never learn. Well, we're the Lord's kids. We're his children. He wants to protect us from making terrible decisions. So do we consult him first and ask that he answer within his will? Or do we say, this is what I want, Lord, and because this is what I want you to give it to me? Sometimes he does give it to us to show us that it's not the right path.
Yeah.
And that's really what I think happened to me. I mean, I wanted to be an attorney. He let me do it.
Yeah.
And he said, basically, are you ready to listen to me?
So you get there and take us to the moment where you realize, like you're saying, you've got, new marriage, all the stuff piling up, but you take us to the point where you go, I think I missed it, and I think I got a course correct here. Yeah,
that's where God's grace and mercy can manifest itself down here on earth too, because I had just a loving, unconditional, loving, supportive spouse. And so when you feel like you're a failure, or you feel like, I don't know if I can deliver on what I thought I was going to deliver for my wife. And I say, I don't think this is, if Barb were here, she would be chuckling because she didn't marry me because I was going to be an attorney. I kind of had that in my mind that, this is some sort of level I've achieved. She didn't care about what I was. She knew who I was. And she loved me for beyond what my vocation was. And so when I had an opportunity to go into the financial services business, and I had to basically live off a commission and not have a salary like I was used to in law. And I remember when I went into that, I just said, I think I probably told Barb this too, but I said, Lord, let me fail quickly so I don't forget how to be an attorney if this isn't where you want me to go. But if it is, give me affirmation. Yeah. I need to know that this is where you want me to go. And I still, Darren, at that point, I didn't have complete confidence, and this is good for your listeners to hear. Just because I stepped out in faith and I felt like this was where God was taking me, I wasn't exactly sure. And I think you can go through the Bible. I don't think Abraham was exactly sure when God called him. I don't think Moses was exactly sure. I don't think Noah was exactly sure. So you can go all through Scripture, and walking out in faith isn't always, hey, I know this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not going to worry at all along the way. And so, taking that step of faith and going out was a scary thing, because I needed to be able to believe, and I did, that God was behind it. But it helped tremendously to be able to have the support of my wife and those whom I cared about most.
You took a year to kind of put a fleece out there and make sure that it was the right decision. Tell us that story.
Yeah, right. So the same gentleman I'm working with now, his name's Pat. Pat had recruited me, and he made it to where I could make the transition. And I said, Pat, I can't make this commitment yet because I really need to be able to be sure that this is what God's calling me to do. So I'm going to take a year really to redouble my efforts and making sure I'm doing what I should be doing, and make sure that God doesn't want me still to be, or if this is just an obstacle that God wants me to overcome for his glory in law. And so I remember Pat saying, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm just telling you that if you don't do this now, you'll find reasons not to do this, down the road. And I said, well, I appreciate what you're saying, and I understand, but I still got to do it. And I mean, I don't know if it was a year to the day, but it was pretty close to a year later. I think he got the shock of his life when I called him back and I said, "Hey, you remember me?" And I just during that was a long year. It was a difficult year because what I'm pleased about it, Darren, is that I really did it for the Lord. I didn't want to fail, but I also didn't want to just jump into something else without consulting him. So I spent a lot of time praying, asking for guidance, really praying, and a lot of times saying, "Please tell me you still want me to be an attorney," in a lot of cases. But if that's not the case, I think I don't want to say that this was my Gethsemane, because there was nothing to like what Christ went through, but it's kind of like, if this cup could pass, hey, if I don't have to eat these loans and have to go in a new vocation and have to deal with my pride being swallowed and so forth, I'd rather not have that happen. But if that's what you want me to do, Lord, imperfect Chip versus perfect Christ, that was an important year of growth, and it was, and there were, I'm sure some of your listeners will be able to say, "I'm there now," or "I can think of that time when I was in the valley." And if you don't have valley experiences, it's really hard for your faith to grow. Yeah. Because if all you do is have mountaintop experiences, you probably aren't listening to the Lord a whole bunch, because he's not just all about, hey, once you're a believer, things get easy and I'm going to make everything just work for you.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I heard a leadership coach talk about is, sometimes when you catch a vision for a future mountaintop, something further out and higher up, and you're on a mountaintop, is the difficult part is you go, oh, okay, now I've gotten up here, I can see where I want to go. I'm going to that mountain. But the only way to get to that mountain is through a valley. Right. So you got to go from where you are, and then and once you get below the tree line, you have no idea, what's down there. And so
that's a good point.
What is interesting to me is I'm thinking about, like, even I don't know why my brain's going here, but like high school, college, like journaling, like maybe I'm dating someone and it's like, I will go back and see a journal, and like for 3 weeks or 3 months, I'm like, feel like I'm supposed to break up with this girl, but you just keep asking God, "Now, God, are you sure? Like, give me wisdom here." And then you're like, "I think I'm supposed to break up." And like, how long where God's like, "Hey, that sense is not going away. That means I'm guiding you." And then you just basically basking because you don't want to have to do it. But so I'm guessing during that year, you just kept feeling like more and more like, yeah, it's time for me to break up with the lawyer.
Yeah, I'm a slow learner, and so and what
we all are, right?
Well, what I'm grateful for is that any of the major decisions that I've made in my life, and there's probably been 3 or 4, it hasn't been because I've been a visionary, or because it's something where I had this amazing insight. It's been mostly because God's closed other doors, and he said this, almost like he's pushing me in that direction. So when I said, "Lord, close those doors so that if I shouldn't go to a different firm or go on this particular track, a corporate counsel or something like that, close that door," boom, 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 they were closed. And it was, this door is always open. And it wasn't the door I wanted to go through. Monty Hall, I wanted to go through door number 1, and door number 2 was the one he wanted me to go through. So he kept closing 1 and 3 and 4, 5, 6, and 7. So it was, he made it clear to me that I was supposed to step out in faith. What I didn't like to do, Darren, is go out there and not have assurances. I wanted to go out there and say, "Hey, if I'm leaving, I want to make sure, I want you to I want some bucket of money to drop, or I want something to be clear for me." And I did have some of those assurances, which I can share, if you want me to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that was clear was when I came over, and it was slow going. I was a slow learner. If Pat were here, he'd tell you I did things twice as hard. I didn't bring people along with me to help me. I wanted to make the mistakes myself. Again, wrestling with pride. But during that time, his son got sick and eventually passed away. And so it was an affirmation that God wanted me there, not because I was going to make a lot of money, not because of he just said, "I want you there because I'm going to use you to be able to be a friend to him. I'm going to use you to be able to be my voice to him during the most difficult trial I think any parent could go through."
Absolutely.
And so there were little things, that was a big thing, but there were things along the way where relationally, which is really where I wanted to be an attorney. I'm a relational person. I wanted to be able to make a difference in people's lives. And I was starting to see that within my office, and being able to see God work in that respect. And then he was very gracious in that it wasn't that long before he started to give me affirmation that, yeah, I want this to be your career. And now I'm really going to be able to show you how I've knitted you, how I've made you, and how you're going to be able to use this vocation, which is maybe at the outset of what you talked about, to where this is going to be a ministry. This isn't just about you making money. I'm going to provide for your family, but I'm going to use this so that people are going to see me through you.
So you step into that environment, and it's financial services, kind of career. Looking back, did you step into it and see, you know what, God has given me some natural talents, and I know the relational side of your strengths definitely help that, because if there's something that people need to trust, that's what they need trust with. If they're going to trust somebody with their money, they need to trust the person. So you definitely have that skill set. But are there other things you look back that you realize, oh wow, God, or as you've walked through it, that you're like, wow, you uniquely made me for this?
Yeah, He didn't make me struggle for very long to see that the skills that He had given me, the gifts that He had given me, were going to be on full display. I mean, I was able to use all the tools in the toolbox to be able to talk to people about their finances, and so that was very fulfilling. But the kind of cool thing, which shows just how fun God can be sometimes, is that in that first year, I would network with everybody. I sent a letter with a $1 bill in it, says encloses a tax-free $1 bill. It's not worth it. It was goofy stuff. Yeah. Anything that people would meet with me. I bought more lunches and breakfasts than I ever did when I didn't even have the money. And it was just an opportunity to get out there. And one of the things that I did was I networked with some of my law school buddies and people that I stayed in contact with. And one of them introduced me to their parents, and through working with them, I made more with that one client than I did as a lawyer that whole year.
Wow.
So this is not to say this isn't prosperity gospel stuff, but I'm just saying God said, you know what? Even though you didn't listen to me all those years, I'm not only going to bless you now that you've been through the desert and you're willing to listen to me, I'm even going to use the mistake you used that you did back in law school. And I'm going to actually use that so that you can get a little jump start on your career. And then the skills that I learned through being a lawyer have helped me in that regard. So he said, I'm not going to waste that either. Yeah. I'm going to use some of those scars. I'm going to use some of those things that you had. And I'm actually going to use it for your advantage. I mean, what an awesome gift from the Lord to be able to say, I'm going to take everything that you screwed up on, and I'm just going to cast it aside. He didn't do that. He said, I'm going to use some of your mistakes for your advantage, and that's just I
love
awesome.
That, Chip. That's so good. I love Davey Blackburn. We found him on the podcast, and good friend, and he leads a ministry literally called Nothing Is Wasted, and he experienced great tragedy in his life, but he takes people through walking through, trauma in their life and all of the different, kinds of pain that we have had. And whether it's, a big T trauma or a little T trauma, these seasons and helping us realize, like you said, like God is so good, he doesn't waste anything. So you step into this, things get rolling. You're realizing the connections you can have relationally, the great impact that happens. And that goes without a lot of crazy mishaps for a good little bit. Life starts clicking along. And I think what we want in life, right? Most of us want the story that it's like, then I discovered God's will for my life, and pretty much it was just, unicorns and butterflies, and and you've had a good life, and you're very grateful for that. But a few years ago, you faced another challenge. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, just as a prelude to that, you mentioned about God doesn't waste anything. I heard a really good testimony from a friend who has lost 3 children, 3 separate times. One from a congenital heart issue at the age of 2, another one from a congenital heart issue around the same age, and then third one, 5-year-old falling off a tricycle.
Unreal.
Lost 3 children. And so when this man speaks about pain, I listen, and I think, and just about everyone who talks to him does. But he made a statement, and it's grounded in Scripture, but it's his way of saying, but he makes it in his terms. God doesn't waste pain, and I love that. If you're willing to be used, God will not waste any of that. And so that rang true for me back in 2018. So I guess it's coming up on 3 years. When I found out that I had this little knot on my neck, and I Barb said, "You want me to go with you?" No, I said, "Don't worry about it. It's it's probably some fleshy thing that they just have to, I was more concerned about the cosmetic side of things. But it was that day that they did a needle biopsy, and the doctor came in and pathologist came in, and she just, had that look on her face, and she said, "It's you got cancer, and I don't know where it started or where it spread." And so it was stage 4 metastatic squamous cell carcinoma. Try saying that 3 times. You want to try that, Darren?
No,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So just saying it once is enough for me. But what the question that you asked is that, even though things were going well in just about every other aspect of our lives, we have 3 girls, they're all healthy. Everything's, life is really good. But this was a big curve, to be able to get cancer. And I think we may have talked about this before, Darren, but you've probably heard this said before when someone's being interviewed that just went in and took down an active shooter in a theater or something, or that hero that runs to danger as opposed to running away. No one really knows what they're going to do until they're actually faced with that, right? Mm-hmm. So I felt like my faith was strong. I'd been tested a little bit with it was a big deal to me back then. Everybody's pain is relative. Yeah. Everybody's discomfort is relative. Yeah. So I don't want to diminish and say, well, if you don't have cancer, you have no idea what challenges are, because right. I felt very challenged up until that point.
Yeah.
And it was a different challenge, but you don't know really how you're going to face death until you really are facing it. And so, sitting on the couch opposite my wife and the look on her face and just the questions that we had, and we decided not to share it with our girls until we knew exactly what the situation was, whether to prepare them for all these terrible treatments or whether it was preparing them for a funeral. We didn't know what we were going to do. And so, but I remember sitting with Barb and saying, "Is God the same today as he was earlier this morning?" And she said, "Yes." Then I said, "Then we don't have to worry. Now, we're going to go through some difficulties, but we don't have to worry about the results of the MRI or of the PET scan or any of these other things." And so that first step was a big one for me, because I knew that my faith was going to sustain me, because I didn't panic. I was, a million things were going through my mind. Sure. So I don't want to make it seem like I was up on this pedestal or anything. But I remember I was running and I was going through and this is I'll be brief, but my eldest daughter had shoulder surgery. She plays tennis in college, and it was going to potentially end her tennis career. And I remember that picture of putting Isaac on the altar, and I said to myself, "Lord, I'm putting Zoe on the altar, and I'm just trusting you. That you're going to heal her, but I trust you 100% if it means she can't play tennis." And it wasn't but 3 months later, I said, "Now, Lord, I'm putting myself on the altar, and I trust you completely. I trust you with what's going to happen to my daughters without a father, or my wife without a husband." A lot of people were affected during that journey, and they were afraid and dealing with losing me. My mom, my mother-in-law, a lot of people that I had grown very close to. And to be able to say, "I trust you, Lord, no matter what. And I know that you have a plan, and that you're going to use this disease and this trial to be able to draw me closer to you, and for people to see you in through me in ways you couldn't do it without me having cancer."
Yeah. Wow. That's heavy, Chip. Yeah, to get to that place where, and I think, we all want to say that we would do the same, or we want to if we're following Christ, but to those moments where, like you're saying, like in my brain, it's like when you say, "I'm going to trust the character of God, even when the circumstances don't seem to maybe match up."
Right.
I guess we don't really need faith until we need faith. You know what I mean? But I think it's when we get to those moments where we really need our faith, sometimes we begin to think that somehow God has forgotten or double crossed us somehow. But he hasn't, and he didn't in your case. And that's the crazy part, is because of what he's done right through Jesus in the cross, is that, obviously, spoiler alert, you didn't die of cancer because you're here, right? But even if you had, like you were saying, he would have been, I mean, he is faithful to you for eternity. And he would have been faithful in the moments to everyone that was still left behind.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's well said, Darren. I would say that also that when you get it, when you really get it, that God owes you nothing more other than what he's done on the cross, as you mentioned, what that guarantees us. I mean, there aren't very many, and that's a no word in the financial planning world to say guarantee. You do that like it's like kill presidents, like the alarm bells go off. You don't ever want to say any guarantee to anybody, but Christ can guarantee to us what our future is going to be. And as the Bible says, our life is a vapor. You've got kids, you when they were born and where they are now. I mean, it just probably has seemed like it's gone so fast.
Oh, yeah.
It's so, I've got a daughter graduating from college and another daughter graduating from high school this year and one in between. And it's just, I can still remember the day they were born. And so it just goes through so fast. And so to be able to know that for God, whether I die at 52 or 50 at the time, 50 from cancer, or whether I die at 55 of cancer or something else when I'm 90, it is a vapor. And what I can hold on to, no matter what that date is that I can hold on to eternity and know that he, not only is he going to take care of my soul, but he's also going to provide for my family and all those who call upon his name. And so that gives me great comfort. I'm not looking forward to dying. I'm not looking forward to suffering. I think of this Tyler Trent, remember him, the young man from Purdue?
Yes.
And I remember hearing him at his funeral, which if any of you haven't gone online and looked at Tyler's funeral, I think it's probably still on YouTube or something, College Park. It's amazing how this young man was able to say, I really didn't appreciate God until I got cancer the second time and then the third time. And I'm thinking, this is a young man, less than half my age. And he's shown a maturity of saying that he's like thanking God for the cancer that he's gotten because it's allowed him even more effective. And he was, I would say that he's 3 times more effective than I was because he had to go through it 3 different times. And, so he had the privilege of being able to reach far more people than the average person. I have the privilege of reaching more people because of cancer than someone who doesn't have cancer. But I don't care if you are a housewife. I don't care if you're a metal worker, if you're an attorney, or whomever you are. If you have the Lord and you recognize that truth, and I don't care if your ambit or your sphere is multiple people. I've got a lot of people I can talk to as clients. When you have their money, they listen to you. Yeah. When you have cancer, they listen to you even more. Yeah. So those are two. That's a pretty dynamic combination. But I don't care who you are. When you are in His will and you know that He is working through you, He's going to use you mightily, and it's not a numbers game. It's not like how many. So I am grateful that I have an opportunity to witness to a lot of people through my work. But whatever you're doing, God has a specific purpose for you, and the person that He puts in your path. My wife and I joke around sometimes, and she did when I was coming up for this thing, and she said, "Good luck," because she knows I don't believe in luck. Yeah. And the other thing that she says to me, "Take care," because we don't ever say that. It's like that's like this platitude that we all use. But she said, and I know there's going to be a lot of coincidences because I don't believe in any of those things. I don't believe in luck. I don't believe in coincidence. So absolutely true. Everybody that people put, you and I being together today. Yeah. We know one thing. There's going to be someone listening, and that's because that's what I've prayed. Yeah. There's going to be someone listening today that God is He's going to use whatever imperfect words that we're using today, yeah, and He's going to have it resonate in their ears, and it's going to change their life. Yeah. And I want to direct people to this, and maybe other podcasts. They'll listen to me because they know me, but then they might listen to other Darren Earlywine podcasts every Wednesday at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. And it's going to impact lives, and people are going to realize that I have a purpose. Yeah. God's given me a purpose, and I don't have to be measured by what I do. I have to be measured by who I obey, and that's powerful stuff. I thought about when you were coming in today, Chip. Today, I thought to myself, what we did last time was great, but I just thought to myself, I wonder if Chip will say a sentence today
that you didn't say last time, and this whole microphone situation was to set it up for you to say something you didn't last time that's going to eternally impact someone's life that's listening. And, I'm going to pray and believe that that's the case, and I know you will too. Last question. It's a big one, and we'll land the plane with this. If I gave you a magic wand or a magic computer, and you could Control-Alt-Delete the failed law degree in career and Control-Alt-Delete cancer, and you would be like, I'm taking these out of the story. This is not a part of the Chip Woods story. Would you do it?
Absolutely. I don't want to do that. I wouldn't want to go through that stuff. I know that's not the answer you were looking for.
I like where it's going.
But let me tell you exactly how I'd answer that. People that say I have no regrets, certainly I didn't do anything wrong with cancer. Maybe I did. Maybe I'll find out that I did something that caused it to happen. But people that say they live without regret, I have lots of regrets. If I could go back and change the things that I did, I would, because I'll tell you this quick story. I was driving to Dayton with my daughter, with my eldest daughter. We were getting ready I was dropping her off to go to school. And she said to me, Dad, what's your biggest regret? And I said, oh man, it's like I started to go through the list of all the things that and so I'm pretty honest with my kids. And so I told her some of the things that I did, especially in college, that I really regretted. And I said, what are your regrets? And I'm not kidding you. I watched her as I was driving and out of the corner of my eye, because I got my eyes on the road too. But she labored to think of something really bad that she did that she really, that would be worthy of the worst thing that she did. And I said, Zoe, that is such a gift. It's such a gift to have to struggle to really look at what you've done wrong. I've got lots of regrets. And if I could go back, I would have changed a lot of things. But because we serve a merciful, loving God, he uses those mistakes to show his mercy and to be able to motivate us to say, you know what? If I can forgive you, can you forgive that person that's wronged you? Can you be more merciful towards others? So the mistakes that I've made or the afflictions that I've had with cancer, it doesn't take much to I had 7 weeks of radiation and chemotherapy, and it was brutal. So I would never want to go through that again. But I know when I was getting treatments, there were a lot of people that were going through for the second time and the third time. Yeah. So I would rather not have had that, Darren, and I'm glad he didn't give me the choice, because I would have said no. But the fact that he didn't, once again, because of his wisdom, he knew, I've given you enough faith, Chip, where you can handle cancer with me. I've given you enough faith that I can forgive you for those stupid mistakes you made back in college when you weren't listening to me at all. I can use them to benefit others. It's part of your testimony. It's part of your story. So I do honestly say I don't want any of those things to happen. I wish I had a life more like my daughters, who have lived, even though because of what they've done, doesn't make God love them more, but they just have fewer obstacles in their lives that because they have chosen to make better decisions than I did. Yeah. And I think, and that's an encouragement, but because we serve a merciful God, he didn't say, well, I love Zoe, Ella, and Abby more than you because they've been better girls than you were a young man.
Yeah. It's so not an acceptance love issue.
No. And so that's the cool thing. There were probably people in your life, and I know I've heard some of them on your podcast, that have made horrible decisions, made terrible things, and still God's using them. Look through Scripture about the broken people that God uses. Go into Hebrews 11. Go through that wall of fame, of all those, and they were all flawed people that made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. So you wish you had the wisdom to skip the regrets, but you're glad you have the mercy to walk through them.
Well said. You ought to write a book. That could be a book title. That's good.
Coming later, 2021. Chip, thank you so much for being back on the podcast. Yeah. We got it recorded this time. If we have you back again, we have a whole new story, which I'm sure you've got plenty of them.
Well, do you think 2 was better than 1? Because maybe we ought to go to 3 or 4.
Well, we did better this time. We had a great flow, good energy. I liked it. Anyway, Chip, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Darren.
Absolutely. And we're back from the land of Chip Woods. Thanks, Chips, for being Chips. Thanks, Chips. Remember Chips? Did you watch Chips growing up as a kid? Well, not if you're not like 40. I watched Chips. It stood for California Highway Patrol, and it was an awesome show. Ponch and John, they rode motorcycles all over San Diego, and it was one of my favorite TV shows. But this podcast isn't about Chips. It's about Chip Woods. And I just, Chip, thank you for the grace to come back a second time, guys. I'd like to tell you that was the only time I've forgotten to record a podcast and done the whole episode, but it's not. Okay. And so there are some regrets that have been racked up here in hosting the podcast, because I do a few things very well. I do most things maybe mediocre, and the detail thing is beyond mediocre. And so thank you for Chip for making the time to come back in, and we were able to record the podcast again. And here's the deal. Maybe it's about you recording podcasts like me. Maybe it's about missing God's call for your life like Chip. But maybe you're at a place right now where you're like, Darren, I have a ton of regrets. Ton of regrets. And it could be from you're at a place now where you started listening to the podcast because you've realized, you know what, I have built a life for myself and never consulted God in the process. And now God's beginning to bring something to life in me. And I'm realizing that I may have wasted decades of my life, if not just years, chasing down a dream, chasing down a career, chasing down what I wanted and never consulting God in the process. It could be that, or you may have some regrets over here that it's not necessarily like I don't consult God on like the actual major direction of my life. For you, maybe it's, you know what, I have a lot of regrets because I am forgetting to actually submit my life to God on a daily basis. It's not about calling. It's not about career. It's about obedience. It's about intimacy and connection in my life. And one is more of a grand scope, like 30,000, 80,000 foot view of your life. And then one of them is in the nitty gritty, day after day after day. And I was just listening to a podcast this week with Erwin McManus, one of my favorite pastors, authors, podcasters. And Erwin's talking about this concept of self-mastery. And the reality that as much as we would like to abdicate the responsibility for our own lives to God or blame others, it ultimately comes back to us. And Erwin brings us back in this podcast. He brought us back to the story of Cain and Abel. And as Cain and Abel came to present their sacrifices to God, Abel's was acceptable to the Lord, and Cain kind of did his own deal. Came up with his own plan, and it was unacceptable to the Lord, and God told him that, and he was frustrated, and he was angry. And what God says to Abel, or what God says to Cain is really interesting. He says, Cain, if you do well, if you do what you're supposed to do, basically, life will go well for you, but be careful because sin is crouching right at the door, ready to devour you, but you must master it. Which is an amazing statement for God to say. Like, this is after the fall, right? And I think sometimes we like to think that because of the sinful nature and because of the fall, we have no ability to do what's right, and we're just on our own. And the reality is that right after the second story, the first story after the fall is God telling Cain, listen, you need to master yourself. You need to get a handle on your emotions, your mental situation. You need to take responsibility and ownership for your own path. Now, is God involved? Absolutely. Has God made you on purpose and for a purpose? Yes, he has. But guess what? He's not making your decisions day in and day out. You are. And you can blame your parents or your ex-husband or your ex-wife or whatever it is for where you're at right now. But it's going to be the process when you begin to exchange regrets, right, with actual responsibility. To take ownership of your life and move into God's call and into a place of agreement and obedience from a day in and day out perspective that you're going to see yourself becoming who you're born to be. If you're trying to get back on the track, I love what Chip talked about there. There came to some parts, right, where he was really certain that he had to move away from being an attorney, but he was very unclear on what that process was going to be. It took him a year to kind of put that fleece out and try to figure that part out. And here's the encouragement I want to give you. I've said this before. I remember hearing a quote from Mother Teresa. A guy came and asked her, Mother Teresa, please pray for me. I have something going on in my life, and I need some real clarity of what God wants me to do. And Mother Teresa said, I'm not going to pray that God would give you clarity. And he thought he was a little offended. Like, what's the deal? You're Mother Teresa. You're supposed to pray, right? That's what you do. And she said, I will not pray for clarity. She said, I will pray for certainty. And see, there's a difference there, is that Chip came to the place where he was certain, I'm not supposed to be a lawyer anymore. He began to consult God on his will for his life, and then he moved forward in obedience Certain that's how he was supposed to go. What he didn't have is clarity on how it was going to work out. Am I going to be successful over here? Am I going to be able to pay my rent? Am I going to be able to pay my mortgage? Like, is this stuff going to work out? How's it going to work out? I don't know. What I'm certain is that God's calling me to go here. And I'm also certain in the character of God. And that's what I want you to focus in on. When you are unclear of how the outcomes will work, what I want you to do is I want you to bet on the certainty of the character of God. When you're certain about the character of God, the lack of clarity of the details of where you're walking don't scare you. They don't lead you off track. You're able to continue to step into and move forward in what God's calling you into. And for Chip, that was definitely tested when he tested positive for cancer. And I love the quote that Chip gave us there, right? That he said to his wife that night, he said, honey, he said, is God the same tonight that he was this morning before we knew I had cancer? And they had to come to the conclusion that yes, he is. That's certainty in the character of God. Is God the same now that I have cancer as he was yesterday when I didn't? Yes, he is. Is God the same now that I'm understanding that I've got to come back into a place of actually consulting him for his will for my life? Is he the same God now as he was when I was? Yes, he is. When I come to the place where I've realized that I've been not submitting my daily decisions to God and doing whatever I want, and I've got a pile of regrets, can I trust the character of God there? And what I know about him is that he is slow to become angry. He's quick to forgive, that he's forming not against me, that he's near me, not far from me, that he's merciful, that he's loving, that he's compassionate, that he's gentle, that he's powerful. When we can come back to these character traits of God that we can become certain about, when the path ahead seems a little bit unclear, our certainty in the character of God could move us forward in it. That's what I want you guys to take away from this episode. And the last thing there too, we talked about one of the last things we said there on the episode is I want as a takeaway for you, that idea that if you have a lot of regrets, whichever category they fall into, whether it's not submitting or it's not consulting, it's coming to the place where, as we said there with Chip, wish you had the wisdom to skip the regrets, but glad for the mercy that got you through them. And that's where you're at, friend. Because here's the reality. Life's a one-way street. I wish we could get do-overs. I wish I had a time machine, push the button, go back, try it over, but you don't. You just keep moving forward, certain on the character of God and relying on the grace and the mercy of God to get you through those regrets, and to not just have them be regrets, but he can actually redeem them, as Chip talked about, right? Nothing's wasted. He can redeem the regrets and send you into the next step of becoming who you're born to be. Goodness gracious, guys. Every episode, I just love hanging out with you more and more. Thank you so much for listening. Leave us a review. Share the episode with somebody. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram. Just search for Darren Earlywine. I'm out there. And remember these three things. God's for you, not against you. He's near you, not far from you. And he's created you on purpose and for a purpose. Thanks for hanging out again right here on the Darren Earlywine podcast. See you guys.